This week's discussion is learning to write, and I feel that you'll see that these two chapters tie in very strongly and closely to the comprehension chapter we discussed last week. So a framework for writing. Writing is a transcription process. You have to be able to transcribe the sounds into the letters or phonemes. So you have to have that phonics knowledge and be able to write what it is that you're thinking about. Writing is composing text for purpose. Every text has a purpose for writing. It has a specific and unique linguistic, cognitive, and social pragmatic requirements, and it's a long developmental process which can be lifelong. And think about the type of writer you are now compared to the type of writer you were in maybe 10th grade English, or in even as a senior in high school or an undergraduate. Your writing has grown based on the expectations of your writing and the type of writing that you're doing, such as the research article writing that analysis that you provided for this class. And as you move further along in your writing growth curve, you'll become more efficient and effective in writing in the academic terms versus the traditional narrative or other expository text methods. So writing is the most direct way to study writing is through their products. That is a typo. All right. So essentially, traditionally, writing's been studied just through children's written products and work. If we study writing as a cognitive process, and then it becomes more transparent, and that's studying the writing while the child's actually doing it. What are you trying to say? Why are you choosing to say it like that? How could you say it differently? Planning, generating, and revising stages of writing are not linear or sequential, but rather they're reciprocal and integrated processes occurring concurrently. So it's not just I plan it out, then I write it, and then I revise it. This is a process that's happening reciprocally and throughout the whole writing process, because you can still be planning as you're writing. You can be revising as you're writing because you type it out, or you write it out and say, no, I don't like the way that sounds, and you go back. It's not that you always only revise at the finished product level. So the writing process is much like everything else in our linguistic cognitive domains. It is an integrated process. It's not, you can't separate out the individual parts. Executive function, memory, attention, and motivational systems were incorporated into the writing process model as the studies on writing grew. So initially, again, it was just plan, generate, revise, but then researchers started looking more at executive function and its role in writing. And the writing process for young children is more sequential and less global. So of course, when you first start writing, it is sequential. You plan, you write, and you revise, because they spend so much time at the transcription level of knowing how to get their thoughts down on paper. They cannot be revising yet because their cognitive load is focused on the initial writing and getting the thoughts down. Okay, so what does writing look like in the emergent early school years, ages 4 to 8? So the researchers have researched writing by quasi-interactive observations. What does it say? Why do you write? And at the very beginning of the writing process, one main context is drawing. So if you look at kindergarten work, even pre-kindergarten work, children can draw a picture and tell a story with that picture. That's a very early a developmental stage of writing. And then there's drawing and writing has different hand movements than arm-hand movement patterns for writing. So what that is saying is that even early on, say for instance a 4-year-old, you can have a 4-year-old that has a picture, and then you can have some things that maybe look like letters, or maybe even some letters randomly written down, but not true letters. And that's examples of early beginning writing in children, because I know that the circles and sticks that we use for making letters are different than the maybe more rounded and detailed types of drawing that we use to communicate a story. The developmental foundations of writing are independent and prior to formal schooling. And writing writing as multimedia productions, children can talk, draw, write, and sometimes dramatize the stories. So it's not going to just be one avenue or venue early on in the writing. They're going to use every way they can to convey their story that they're wanting to tell you. Gradually, as they become more knowledgeable about narratives and how narrative structure, writing conveys more narrative action, and drawing illustrates the key ideas. So you'll have a picture of, like the picture on page 247, it's the child soccer. Yeah, it looks like a soccer. Yeah, the soccer picture, and that's just what the whole story is about versus the narrative is telling the story. Writing also changes from a social prop to a social mediator, where writing is the platform for social activity. So kids write what they know, and if they want to make up a story, they might make up a story about their friend and them going to a soccer game or going to play something or a play date, something like that. Usually they're tying their friends into their stories. So therefore, writing should be related to the curriculum, at the Common Core curriculum, but it also should have a child-centered interest. We're going to not be successful with teaching writing if we only focus on curriculum and say writing a story about snails. That's what I have on the refrigerator from Kennedy from this past school year, instead of writing what they want to write about. Conventional writing is when another person can read it without too much difficulty. That's what the definition of conventional writing is. So to have conventional writing, they must have a sound-symbol relationship, they must have words as stable, memorable units, and they must have text as a stable, memorable unit. And essentially a layperson can read this and understand what's going on without much assistance from the child. Most first grade classes provide plenty of opportunities to write at the text level and doesn't solely teach the writing system. So you've seen where they've moved away from just teaching how to write to giving opportunities to write, writing centers or writer's workshop are types of examples of what you'd see in the curriculum. And it's very integrated in Common Core. There's entire standards devoted solely to writing. So you have speaking and listening standards, and you have writing standards. Now those writing standards for kindergarten and first grade are much smaller, and the expectation is at the age appropriate level then as, say, for fourth grade. So when they're writing and learning how to write, certain types of genres emerge, and they know this from studying in some first grade students. We have the chronological genre, action, event oriented. That's the most common type. And then you also have the non-chronological, which is object-oriented. These are descriptive text, interactive text. Kennedy's snail stories. Snails are slow. Snails live in a rock. I forgot there's one more sentence, but it's all around the snail. There's no sequential order to it or no initiating event or action. Gradually, drawing and writing become disassociated over the course of the first grade year. So at the beginning of the year, you can see they're heavily dependent on a drawing, and the drawing facilitating the writing or facilitating the knowledge of what the text is about. But as the year moves forward, you can see the drawing becomes less prominent and the writing becomes more elaborate. Labels were most text at the beginning of the year, and the labels were a non-chronological type of writing. But they were gradually decreased over the year. They were negligible, is what it says in the last periods of the school year. Basic records declined. A basic record is chronological, and expanded records increase. Expanded records would be talking about something with a little bit more expansion to it. Attribute series increase. The facts were stated about a topic, but no particular order were there, and they could be rearranged. And that probably that snail story I'm talking about with Kennedy would be like an attribute series. It's talking about the attributes of the snail, but they could be put in any order. There was no particular order to the text. Text of 2 or more clauses were 95% of all text at the end of the year. So almost all of the text at the end of the year had at least 2 clauses, if not more. But this was very rare at the beginning of the school year. And all the children wrote text that could stand alone without pictures by the end of the year, which met the definition of the conventional writing. So you can see that children grow tremendously at the initial stages of writing and learning how to use text to convey meaning. And a lot of this is integrated from all their learning with their reading and how the stories communicate certain stories serve a communicative function as well. So these genres seem to be invented by children and appropriated from the environment. And they continue to change from first grade to third grade. So the genres grow, and they have several different genres. Several genres frequent in the text of younger children were less frequent by the third grade, and vice versa. So they change greatly based on how the children's knowledge is growing in the general narrative language abilities, because they're being exposed to more types of literary texts. Young elementary children can write in genres that lay a foundation for later expository writing. Again, I keep on going back to that Kennedy snail story because it's on my refrigerator, but it's tying into this so well because the snail story would be leading into an expository type text in the science realm. That was their way of a science lesson about snails or bugs or certain types of animals. That leads to expository. It doesn't sound expository right now because it's just 3 sentences with no complexity and no clauses. But as they grow and develop, her writing will become more complex and be able to write a more elaborate story about the facts of snails. Much longer fictional texts with macro structure emerge much earlier than the expository type of elaborated text. Children can use written-like language to write a story and oral-like language to write and orally tell stories, which is the highest level of literary style. So the ability to speak in a literate style with at the same time writing in a spoken style, if the need arises, is the highest type of literary style. And you can see as the writing develops, children will be able to use that function of quotation marks and making the quotation marks. He said, ... They'll be able to code switch essentially from that written language to that spoken language, even at a very young age. So young children have an understanding of the types of writing through genre development. So after third grade, what kind of writing do we see? So that upper elementary, I wanted to show you some writing samples from Kennedy. And this was early in the school year, August, September. Write about why it is your favorite. And so I think they were supposed to write about their favorite activity or toy or something. I can't really distinguish. I definitely see her right there. Maybe there's a cat in there, and it just says, I like to play. You can see very, very simple. Now, this was, that was August. This is September. And it was draw a picture of an animal you would like to see at the zoo. So she wanted to write about parrots. And then this is her story, Can Parrots Talk? Question mark, the parrots is green. So we're growing a little bit, but you can see we're still very early on in the writing development stage. This was, I think, probably October. This doesn't have a date, but I remember when we had to bring the picture of our pet. And her pet is named Diamond. Diamond Sparkle Glitter. You can see we laugh so much about her spelling diamond and not putting that D on the end. So that's Diamond Sparkle Glitter. And he's a boy, by the way. And it says, I love my cat. Diamond love me. All right, so we have 2 sentences. Still not a very elaborate story. Let's see, can I rotate this? This is not, hang on. Okay, this is October 15th. I like to ride my bike. My bike is purple. And you can see that she's drawing the pictures, and she's doing a lot of labeling still, as we were talking about. And remember the social medium, her friends. There's her friend JT. There's Diamond, her cat. Right, that might be my name. That might be Rachel, because I don't remember a child that began with an R in her class. Basket, bike. Looks like a B, maybe. And a lot of these are all tied into the stories that they're doing. In their classroom. All right, so back to her writing samples. All right, this was Veterans Day writing sample. I want to thank you for keeping me safe. You are here at Love Kennedy. And so that's an example of a type of writing style that's not really expository, but the written letter. So writing for a different purpose than just telling a story. Okay. This is the gingerbread man. I know this was around Christmas time. I like the gingerbread baby because he didn't get 8. And you have to love that developmental spelling of 8. Hey, I know how to spell 8, the sight word, and I know 8's past tense of eat, but we're just not quite there yet. So we would need to do some morphological awareness training there. And of course, get is F. But hey, this is our first clause. This is mid-year through kindergarten, and this is our first clause sentence. I like the gingerbread baby because he didn't get 8. Okay? This is also related to the gingerbread story. I like the gingerbread girl because she didn't get eaten. But she might have been trying to say eaten because we're still developing those that irregular verb tense. The man got 8. So now not only do we have a sentence with a clause in it, but we have 2 sentences. So actually you could do 2 independent clauses and 1 subordinate clause. Okay. Sometime. I like horses. They like to eat grass. They live at a farm. As you can see, our spelling has gotten much better. A lot of these are sight words they've been learning throughout the year. Our sentences are complete. They're not too complex, but they are factual, and this is leading into that expository text level. That's what makes me laugh because she dotted all of her letters. So obviously we're going to be very expressive and creative when it comes to our writing. My flowers garden is rainbow. It have pretty flowers. I like them. So we're trying to make it a little bit more complex, but we don't quite have all those mechanisms in place. But her flower gardens is rainbow because of course rainbow is so much fun. All right. That's the social mediator text. My friend is Kate. We like to play treasure hunt. We love each other. This is Kate. And you can see other, we love each other, this is Kate. So she wrote other twice, but there's Kate, there's Kennedy, there's a treasure chest, and there's a swing. So that's an example of what they were talking about early on when you say, okay, it becomes a social mediator, and they're usually talking about their friends and writing about their friends. And Kate's a friend, a daughter of one of our friends that we vacation with every year and play with. So that wasn't even a classmate. It was just an outside class friend, but that's who she wanted to write about. And then finally, do I have one more after this? Yeah. This is the last one. This is one of my favorite ones too because this is the very end of the school year. The 2 fishermen sees a fish flying over their house. They are fishing for fish. They wore jackets. So you can see it's a silly picture. It's supposed to be some type of you expect some type of reaction to what the fishermen might be seeing, but we're not quite at that level yet, but we have moved into a sequential level. The 2 fishermen see a fish flying over their heads. That's what it is, flying over their heads. They are fishing for fish. They wore jackets. What is right there in front of you, there's not any inferencing in that, but that doesn't mean it's not going to come at a later point in time. All right, so now let's look at text age 9+, and unfortunately I don't have a 9+-year-old yet, but as she grows I'll be able to have more writing samples. And I don't know if you noticed in the book, but the author chose her daughter's work as well, so it's a common thing in our field to use our children to convey our message. Okay, so learning to write genre-specific text ages 9+. Transcription fluency takes up cognitive space in early elementary, so we're not writing very long, elaborate stories because it takes us so much to be able to put our thoughts down on paper. Late elementary writing should be a means of knowledge telling what we have knowledge about. By the end of secondary school, writing has become a mean for transforming knowledge or writing to learn. Now I want us to think about this because it says at the bottom on page 250, after writing about a topic, one's knowledge of the topic is far different, more advanced, as a result of having written about it. In a few cases, the process might actually result in new knowledge. So that was your discussion question this week as well. How does writing facilitate learning? Think about how whenever you learn to write about a topic, for instance, if you have a research paper, and you're researching, let's give the example of morphological awareness. Y'all are very interested in that. So not just analyzing a morphological awareness text, but let's write about what the research says and what we know about morphological awareness, what our those implications are, and what could possibly be done in the future with that type of research. Would that facilitate your learning more than just reading about it? And if so, why? How do we get that means out? So I really want y'all to think on that, because I do find, for instance, as I'm teaching these courses and refreshing my knowledge in these very specific areas, that it's facilitating my learning, that I'm still even making connections now, 5-6 years after my dissertation and 10 years after I've been practicing in the field. There's still so much I'm learning, but my learning curve is growing because of the change in the modality of how I'm learning the material, going from being the student to the instructor, and how is the best avenue to get you to learn that. So really think on why that is, what your theories are about how we learn more through writing. So learning the macro structure of writing, genre development. There's narrative, expository, and persuasive writing genres, are the 3 genres typically found in state standards and assessments. And you see this in Common Core. You have writing expectations for informational text. You have writing expectations for literature. And as they grow in the school age, you'll have writing expectations for the different types of persuasive genres or letter writing and whatnot. Proficiency in narrative is first, then expository, and the persuasive is the last one we're proficient in. Children write longer narrative text and use more advanced systems of cohesion than they do in the other types of text. And if you'll recall from last week's discussion and discussion throughout the chapter, we know that narrative format is much easier for children than the expository format. By age 7, children can tell well-formed stories. So orally, they can tell well-formed stories. By 5th grade, children can write well-formed multi-episode narratives. So you can see where Kennedy's kind of at the beginning of those stages, but she's nowhere near to being able to write well-formed multi-episode narrative. But she has multi-ideas in that last text we saw from the fisherman story. Children with language learning disabilities write shorter narratives with more grammatical errors because, of course, they have such difficulties in syntax and semantics and sentence cohesion and structure. Informational text has several macro structures that can be individual or combined, such as compare and contrast, description, problem solution, causation, etc. So the informational text, instead of a narrative genre, you're going to have all of these different types of expository texts. And they can be combined. Comparing and contrasting can be within a description context as well. You're describing 2 different points of view or 2 different items, and you have to compare and contrast them. That's going to cover both of those types of genres. So that makes the expository more complex because you don't know going in what the macro structure is going to be. Text structure development varies depending on the informational genre studied. Syntax increases in complexity and meaning becomes more nuanced even beyond adolescence. So in our writing, we can see that it continues to grow and develop even at the college level. The writing's changing. In persuasive writing, the use of compromise increases with development. And you can see that they do more compromising by an argumentative text by writing the supporting process, which is stating the reasons to back a claim, and negotiation process, convincing the reader to accept those reasons. Negotiation markers include counter arguments, even if, however, obligation and judgment, one should, it's good, degree of certainty, maybe, surely, and writing endorsement and accountability, in my opinion. So you can see how that grows and develops, but that's really that 11th, 12th grade level. That's also going to be the top expectation on that writing rubric for being graded in Common Core standard assessment. So they're going to have to be able to have the skills to do that. And think about our LLD children who have such short narratives and grammatical errors. They're going to really struggle with that type of genre and information relaying. In persuasive writing, students showed a difference in implicit and explicit knowledge of writing as they grow older. So the implicit knowledge being able to write about the genre versus the explicit knowledge of being able to talk about one's knowledge about writing and the writing process. All right, so interpretation of genre studies effects on task and curriculum. More complex tests are produced when they write things they are more familiar with. I mean, that seems to be common sense. If you know more about it, it's going to be easier for you to write about it. Because essentially your cognitive load is less if you're having to retrieve information about something, and then if you just know it automatically. The automaticity of a process improves not only writing, but, reading fluency, comprehension, or any other area. And by the end of this course and by the end of your graduate studies, you should have a certain more higher level of automaticity in speech-language pathology issues. The specific task can help or hinder expression of a genre knowledge. So depending on what the expectation is, it can cause children to have more difficulty. It's difficult to separate the intrinsic cognitive and linguistic factors in genre writing development from the extrinsic factors of curriculum and writing instructions. Children have limited engagement in informational genres in the early elementary, as few as 3.6 minutes per day. But again, Common Core's changing that expectation by putting it in the curriculum that you'll have so much of an informational text standard. Generalist literacy curriculum fails to help students deconstruct the content-specific linguistic features unique to different subjects. Students need more direct instruction and practice with unique features. So in general, children are instructed in writing the planning and writing and revising process, but they're not necessarily directly instructed in the type of genre expectations for science or for social studies, because that's going to vary across the subject content area. So they need more direct instruction in that. And I know Common Core is trying to tie in the subject-specific areas with the writing expectations for those subject-specific content areas. But unfortunately, there's limited research in this area, and hopefully that will change as more focus is becoming. We're putting more focus on the fact that we don't have a lot of research, but this expectation is there. To learn the microstructure of writing sentence grammar, okay, there's an effective modality on sentence form. From mid-elementary to high school, writing shows increasing frequency of later developing syntactic forms and a higher frequency than in spoken language. So you can see that you have that written language versus that oral language, and the written language is more complex. So you have different phases. You have the preparation phase, where texts are not up to a standard of spoken language. This is your planning phase. The consolidation phase is where writing more closely resembles speech. And the differentiation phase, where more written grammar emerges. And finally, the integration phase, writers move easily between oral and written form. And these are your highest level of writers. There can be oral-like if necessary, but some writers never reach the integration phase. That can be something that's never reached, particularly for those students with that language learning disabilities. And it doesn't really give timelines as far as what grades and ages and to be expecting this. It does say consolidation phase is before age 9 or 10, and then 9 or 10 they move to differentiation phase. So between 9 and 10 and 18 or 20, whenever they're finalizing their schooling, they go from differentiation to integration. But again, some people may not ever reach integration. So you could essentially have children graduating from high school with still being in the differentiation phase. They have more instances of distinctive written clause connectivity grammar in 11-year-olds than in 9-year-olds. So, and the book gives examples on page 255 of differences in the spoken and written form of the children telling the stories. Clauses combined by coordination and speaking are reconfigured into a more hierarchical code or subordination in writing. So the speaking is more linear and sequential. Then writing is hierarchical and using those subordinating clauses to communicate your message. Text effects of genre on sentence form. Genre has an impact on syntactic complexity. Narratives show the least amount of syntactic complexity, with a report showing more and persuasion than most. And reports, of course, being that expository type text. Genre affects the distribution of major types of genre affects the distribution of major types of clause connectivity. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. Genre effects were also observed for spoken language. So your spoken language changes just as I'm speaking to you in a lecture-type academic format. That's going to be different than if I was just talking to you casually about a particular student or the general issues in speech-language pathology. Expository texts are more complex than narrative text. Of course, there is the type of genre they are. Features of microstructure in expository writing. All right, you have temporal expression via tense, aspect, and mood. You have a depersonalized, evaluative stance through long and complex noun phrases, generic pronouns, and passive constructions. You can link clauses and sentences with an array of lexical and phrasal connectives. Word length, lexical density, register, and noun abstractness all increase with age. So children can control structural means to communicate different discourse schemas and content with the use of verb forms, clausal constructions, clause sentence combining, and word types. So that's what the microstructure, the individual linguistic pieces of the genre-specific knowledge are. It becomes, of course, more complex as they age, and you're going to see longer words, more semantic density, and more clauses, more complexity to their sentences. So how do we learn the process of writing? Because that's just was the general overview of how writing changes from the early stages into the top level of writing when they're graduating high school. So learning the process, with age, there's an increasing differentiation of planning from content itself to text production. More mature planning consists of thinking about the composition. Initially, when you're planning, they might just see just one or two words to think about, or the graphic organizers. Young children are still in a state of cognitive overload when they write. Now, I think I've said this several times. There's such a load there to get their thoughts down on paper. Text generation is a mental process that is not easily observed. So it's very difficult to observe this for the research purposes. Children who could combine more information points about a topic into a single sentence were better able to defend ideas in expository writing. So those children who can make the highest level, most complex sentences are the best writers. More expert writers devote more time to rising than actually composing. That's a indication of your highest level of writing ability. So to revise a text assumes that an internal standard of comparison. You have to have that executive function ability to evaluate critically what you're writing. And so what types of comparisons do we have? We have the text-based comparison, non-text association, surface qualities, process, and non-interpretal. So text-based refers to characteristics, qualities, and content of the text itself. Non-text association, evaluations based on events and ideas from students' own experience. Surface qualities refers to the mechanics, the grammar. And then process refers to the process of creating and sharing, publishing text. So text-based is going to be your lowest level of revising, but that's also going to be what you see more than anything else in the younger children in writing stages. The process is the highest level about how you created the process. Oh, and the surface qualities, that's the grammar. But when you're revising, you're having to critically evaluate it as someone who's looking from the outside in. Is your message being clearly communicated to the reader? So most fifth grade students use at least text-based revisions. Older elementary children develop a meta-evaluative stance towards writing and meta-thinking about the evaluation. Middle school students showed more sophisticated understanding of writing purpose than younger students, and with time, student writers move from a self-centered local focus toward a more global, audience-oriented, self-aware, and self-regulated focus. So what's the incidence of writing disorders? Because we know that children are going to have difficulty with this. The rate varies from 6.9% to 14.7% nationally. And, it's really difficult to evaluate that because how many of that percentile are children with language learning disabilities, with reading disabilities, with other cognitive deficits? You can't definitively say that the writing disorder is solely unique to writing. What the DSM-4 characteristics of writing, they had poor writing, including grammatical or punctuation errors in sentences, poor paragraph organization, multiple spelling errors, and poor handwriting. 33% of 8th grade and 24% of 12th grade students wrote at or above a proficient level. So as you can see, as a nation, we're generally failing in teaching our children how to be effective writers because 2/3 of 8th graders and 3/4 of 12th graders did not meet the grade level expectations for writing, and that's only going to become worse with Common Core because it's so much more rigorous. The way writing is tested has been criticized, though, from the standpoints of content validity, scoring, and effect on what is taught in schools. This is very subjective. I mean, think about some of the great texts that you've read that have a lot of dialectical language in use, and that's effective. I mean, children are going to write how they speak, and that's the biggest problem I have a lot of times with the writing evaluation, is that children are all going to be expected to write in standard American English, but most of our children in Mississippi don't speak standard American English in their conversation. It's not essentially like standard American English is a second language, and African American vernacular or Southern American English is their first language. It's very difficult to learn that switch, especially if it hasn't been taught very well in school. And there are certain texts. Think about Coming of Age in Mississippi. I don't know if you ever read that book, but it's very dialectical, but that makes it more powerful. And think about Maya Angelou and the effect that her dialect and her linguistic style had on her writing. I mean, if you try to transfer that into standard American English, it wouldn't be as beautiful or powerful or as effective. So there's a purpose and a validity to the dialectical type and style of writing. So essentially, grading is very subjective. This is not something that you can objectively set these expectations. This is where they are. This is what they have to do. There are rubrics, there are guides, but ultimately it's how well the author conveys what they're trying to convey to the reader. So it'll be interesting to see how the Common Core writing standards play out. Writing, reading, and oral language, tying this all together. Writing is not an isolated domain with well-defined place in a developmental sequence that follows the acquisition of oral language. You can't say, okay, if by age 2 you're expecting them to have at least 50 words doing 2-word combinations, well, at age 5 I'm expecting to do this in writing, because they already have the oral language foundation, but of course it's not completely solidified and developed, and it's going to change and grow and develop as they grow. But it doesn't start at the beginning of just learning words like you do with infants. So you can't just isolate it by itself. Oral volubility and verbal IQ are associated with writing quality. So for LLD students, writing difficulties will remain well after oral language and reading abilities have improved. This is the most difficult level for them. Ways in which reading and writing depend on common cognitive domains. They both draw on content knowledge. They both have meta-knowledge about written language. They have common cognitive and linguistic subsystems that underlie writing and reading at both word recognition, spelling, and text comprehension composition. And there's an area of procedural knowledge, the hows of writing. The effective instructional practices in writing. So what do we know about writing instruction? Writing about a reading passage improves comprehension above and beyond just reading and discussion. So if you integrate the writing instruction with the reading instruction and the comprehension, you're going to improve everything. Reading comprehension is improved by explicit teaching of text structure and exemplar passages, followed by writing passages using the same template and paragraph and sentence construction. This last week and posted, but again, I'll go back to those English language, arts and literacy, history, social studies, science, and technological subjects, text exemplars, sample performance tasks. These are, so if you need to teach them using an exemplar text, these are the types of exemplar text you can use. So in K1, text exemplars, stories, poetry, read aloud stories, read aloud poetry, informational text, that expository text we talked about, read aloud informational text, and sample performance tasks for informational text. Let's go down to page 36 and see what that looks like. All right. So this is how you're building that writing. Students identify the reasons. Clyde Robert Bullock gives in his book, A Tree is a Plant, its support and point. This tells you things that students can do to build that comprehension. Here we go, the writing. Use the illustrations along with the textual details to describe the key idea, describe the connection. All of this is building into those writing standards at a later point. All right. Reading fluency is improved by explicit teaching of spelling and sentence construction. Word recognition is improved by explicit teaching of spelling. Increasing the amount of writing students do improves reading, and best course of action is to teach reading and writing simultaneously in an integrated fashion. So we should do it all as everything else, context-based and integrated, and turning those skills at the same time together. So next we'll be developing knowledge and skills for writing. Okay, so developing knowledge skills for writing, and as you can note, this was also written by Carol Westby, who wrote the comprehension chapter, so you're going to see a lot of overlap, as I mentioned at the beginning. So the 20th century, just as literacy has changed into the 21st century, writing has. At the beginning of the 20th century, teaching of writing focused on handwriting, spelling, diagramming sentences, and evaluation of a final written product. Later 20th century focused on writing process, pre-writing, writing, editing, and revision, which was based on a constructivist theory. However, this doesn't really fare well as in isolation. The two need to be integrated. You can't just assume, just like with the whole language approach to reading, you can't assume just because they're exposed to it that they're going to learn all the mechanics of the writing. So we're trying to move towards a more balanced approach to writing that integrates authentic writing activities and the stages of the writing process with explicit skill teaching. Many students require more extended, structured, and explicit instruction to develop skills and strategies essential for writing. They need to be explicitly taught the grammatical structure and sentence construction strategies. So writing foundation elements. You have production, which is the graphomotor skills to produce a written text, whether by handwriting or by keyboarding. The cognitive linguistic factors, which are the linguistic skills, conceptual understanding, and content knowledge. Knowledge of the structures of genre, like metalinguistic knowledge, the metacognitive knowledge, microstructure, macrostructure knowledge, and the processing speed and working memory. You have social rhetorical knowledge of the rhetorical task, knowledge of when and how to use the various genres, and then the beliefs and attitudes regarding oneself as a writer. The writing process elements include planning, which is setting a goal, organizing, deciding how to structure and sequence the content of the text, generating the ideas that will express the linguistic units, and generating the text, revising it, making changes to it, and this number 5 is the addition in the latter 20th century, 21st century writing, executive functions and self-regulation. Such as the ability of selective, sustained and divided attention, attention span, inhibiting, maintenance of cognitive set, and anticipatory process. Self-regulation is the behaviors that are used to guide, monitor, and direct the success of one's performance. All the elements of the writing process are dependent on executive functioning self-regulation. So recognizing that skill in students and how we can teach that skill to them. The foundational skills must be in place for students to engage in the writing process. You have to have writing foundation before you have writing process. So Kennedy and other early elementary students, they're in the writing foundation stage. Students with writing disabilities exhibit deficits on multiple levels across the board. It can be writing foundation, it can be writing process, both. So you need to use text of interest to students. Explicitly teach the methods and have students frequently read and write to become proficient and flexible writers. So you're not just exposing them to it, but you need to engage them in the area of their interest. Because it says at the bottom, they advocate that students write more because reading comprehension is influenced by the amount of their own text that students produce. So we know that they're going to improve comprehension by developing writing. All right. So developing writing foundations. How do we teach these skills? The production and transcription skills. We must have a method of putting ideas down through print or word processing, i.e. the computer. Writing is actually better for students in the word processing rather than handwriting, and they're not really sure what why that is, but it could be because that's just what kids are more comfortable with in today's world. Attending to the mechanics of writing interferes with the higher order writing by causing the writer to forget the intentions of meeting, disrupting the planning process. It takes time away from them. It prevents students from writing fast enough, and affects students' persistence, motivation, and sense of confidence. So you have to have production transcription skills very established to move beyond that in the writing process. Attending to the process and product of writing over mechanics makes the motor act more automatic and easier. So, you're going to move to this stage after they've established all of the phonics knowledge and the transcription process. And the book mentions the program Writing Without Tears that has been a program that they've used to improve handwriting. And you may or may not realize, but cursive writing instruction has really fallen to the wayside and is not being implemented in schools. And there are opponents and proponents for that and different reasons why that's happening. The curriculum standards are very intense, but at the same time, what venue is cursive writing being used other than your signature? Maybe you're note taking, but most note taking now is even on the iPad or in a keyboarding word processing type skill. So there's Writing Without Tears focuses on handwriting. It's one of the few programs out there that is available for that. Now, the cognitive linguistic skills. You must know microstructure and macrostructure. So you can use text exemplars and explicit teaching to teach the writing. A genre is a stage, goal-oriented social process achieved primarily through language. There are phases of genre-based teaching. Phase 1 is modeling. You want to introduce the genre that's to be studied. Discuss the social function of the genre, the schematic stages or components of the genre, and the linguistic characteristics of the genre. Narrative books can highlight the structures that can not only be useful for narratives, but also to provide an introduction to the types of structures needed in expository text. And the book uses the example of The Secret Shortcut and I Want an Iguana. So phase 2 of this kind of linguistic instruction is joint construction of a text. Teacher and students work together to produce a text using guided questions by the teacher. The teacher guides the students by asking questions that focus on the stages of the genre. A popular way to begin this process is to teach poetry or narratives, and it uses the example of Where I'm From as the example, and the student has to fill in the blanks on the to make a poem out of it. Phase 3, independent construction of a text. Students choose the topic and conduct background research more independently while the teacher constructively criticizes. The teacher's questions and comments focus in a constructive way on what the students have done and what they can do to further develop their piece. You want them to, the teacher can provide frameworks or templates for producing narratives which greatly improves the story quality. The story grammar marker is an example the book uses. And then in preparing to write a story, students can be encouraged to outline the elements of the story on a sheet that lists each of the story elements. So that would be like a graphic organizer type of strategy. All right, so developing writing foundations. Now exploring the postmodern genre, we talked about this last week in the comprehension discussion. There's a non-traditional book layout. Students must understand content and structure of traditional texts and recognize how postmodern texts play with the content and structure. So Maleficent, you have to understand the traditional story of Sleeping Beauty to understand what the play on Sleeping Beauty is with the production of Maleficent. And so sometimes that needs to be explicitly taught or stated as well. Children's books can highlight the different structures within and across genres. And they use the example of Open Me, I'm a Dog. And how in that story the book had been turned into the book was actually a dog that had been turned into a book by a magic spell, and it talks about how the table 10.1 gives the examples of how students were able to translate that into their own words. Read me, I'm a baseball. Open me, I'm a penguin. In the Read Me, I'm a Baseball example, it just was talking about a baseball. It didn't have any of the magical element components, versus Open Me, I'm a Penguin was a very similar structure to the Open Me, I'm a Dog book that they were introduced to. So so you can use children's books to instruct this type of generalization. Expository text. Students have fewer encounters with these texts, and there's a science report type of text that comprises 3 genres. So in the science report, you have the sequential procedural genre of steps in the experiment. You have the descriptive genre that reports observed results of the experiment, and then you have the explanatory genre excuse me, that explains the cause-effect relationships that occur during the experiment. So that's one way of teaching expository text writing in the science foundations. So how do we develop the syntactic structures, the microstructure of the text? Writings by good authors can provide students with syntactic patterns. And then the explicit teaching of grammar in a traditional way is actually negatively correlated with the quality of writing by teaching the diagramming of sentences and all the parts of speech, how we were taught essentially this instruction. So sentence combining activities actually have positively affect the quality of writing. So take these 2 sentences and combine them into one sentence. Mentor texts explore how and why authors use particular syntactic patterns to convey meaning. So instead of modeling text, you can mentor the text and take an example of their sentence and move it around, rearrange it, combine it, just like in the video last week from Norris's example of the parsing out of sentences that can also be incorporated into your writing activities. The author also mentions the accelerated literacy program that was discussed last week is a framework for using high-quality text to mentor students in literate syntactic patterns. Sentence combining is another approach where your goal is to make sentence construction and writing more automatic and less labored and make students more conscious of sentence options. And the way in which this can be done is practice 1, identifying. First, students identify adjective clauses in the sentence. By combining, next students are given sentences to combine. Unscrambling, students are given a list of sentences parts to unscramble, so they have the different parts and they have to make it come together into one sentence. Sentence expanding, excuse me, students are to create an adjective clause to complete a sentence. And then combining to imitate, students are presented with a model sentence from a book and they have to combine it to imitate what the author is trying to do. After students have had experiences with this sequence of practice activities based on the model sentences from high-quality children's literature, they're given activities to use the structures more independently. Graphic organizers can help stretch their sentences, but you want to use these with caution because it does not incorporate all the aspects of sentence structure. And then the book uses the example of punctuation takes a vacation because that uses an example of how punctuation is used to convey meaning in text. And the book has several real-life examples. Figure 10.1 on page 278 is a sample science report and teaching that expository text. Table 10.9 on 279 is clausal connecting words, teaching the definition in words with similar meaning. Okay, so developing writing foundations for summarizing. Summarizing is teaching students how to summarize improves the quality of writing and comprehension using text with well-structured microstructure and macrostructure levels. Teach students a rule-based summary strategy that operates on text, macrostructure, and macro rules, which include to delete trivial material, delete material that is redundant. You want to substitute a superordinate term, or even for a list of items or actions. So substitute a superordinate term or event. Sorry, typo. For a list of items or actions, you want to select a topic sentence, or if there's no topic sentence, then invent your own. Summarize taxes working memory, though. You have to be able to retain that information in your working memory. So teachers should review student products to determine what is needed, then teach the specific skills that they need, rather than beginning with a list of skills to teach and then combine the skills to achieve some product. You want to be working from what the student's work is. Summarization requires students to integrate microstructure and macrostructure knowledge and skills for an integration between syntactic microstructure and presentations of ideas and macrostructure. Whew, macro. Say that 3 times fast. Inferences that students make. There are different types of inferences, and summarizing is teaching these inferencing skills as well. So types of inferences that students make, they can make generalizations, which are inferences that reduce the number of text propositions or ideas, elaborations, which are inferences that are not directly implied by the text. They can make reorderings, which are inferences that rearrange text content in an order that is different from the original text. And then finally can do connective words, which are, they express bridging inferences that function to provide coherence between expressed ideas. Now, for expository text and summaries, they require statements that must link to the central topic or theme. They must have statements that must link one another. You must have the nature of the link between statements that can be explicit, and they have statements that are simultaneously linked to central topic in each other. So you can take these and you can score them on levels. Level 0 means students wrote ideas or statements that may have triggered by the topic, but they were not presented in the passage. Level 1, students relied on their short-term memories to retell information. Level 2, students held or manipulated 2 concepts in working memory. Level 3, students held and manipulated 3 concepts in working memory. And level 4, the level requires manipulation of 4 concepts in working memory. And that's going to be the highest level of summarization. So students must have something to write about in the writing process, and they must know how to gather information, plan, organize, review, and revise, and they must be able to regulate their behavior. So think about all of these skills that are required to be able to be a successful writer. In pre-writing planning strategy, students must consider the purpose of writing, the why, the audience, the who, and the knowledge they have or need to have. In organizational strategy, students must have strategies for considering the genre structure, putting ideas into related groups, and labeling groups of ideas. For defining strategy, students must have strategies for ordering ideas, translating ideas into syntactic units in print, and expanding supporting ideas. And finally, at the editing revising strategies, they must have the monitoring of the plan that was met, monitoring organization, and meaningfulness. So these phases should be reviewed, though, as recursive, not linear. These are all happening as the whole entire writing process is happening. The book uses the example of the self-regulated strategy development, where students learn strategies for accomplishing tasks and regulating behavior. Then strategies for writing must consider declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge of the students. They must know what is expected at each stage of the writing process. They must have strategies for how to perform each stage, and they must know when and where to employ particular strategies. All right, so finally, and how we develop the writing process. And as you can see, there's a lot more development of the writing foundations than there is the writing process, because the foundation is so critical and important. So strategies for generative ideas and planning. Pre-writing helps students to generate ideas and inquiry activities that engage children in finding content information for a task that are effective in improving writing. After they have ideas, students will struggle with finding the words to show the reader their ideas. So writing what you know works less for expository text, of course, because you don't know as much about expository text. Writing for understanding, you can use text models and modeling of the writing process and a backward design approach to curriculum design. So you start at the top and work your way backwards from that. Students must be able to effectively research the internet. And if anything, that's probably what they're most used to, rather than actually writing anything, is searching on the internet. But how to be effective searchers on the internet is a little bit different. To plan, students must have adequate background information on a topic and have declarative knowledge about the structural components of a genre. And you can use think sheets to teach this type of strategy. Topic, who am I writing for? Why am I writing? What am I writing? How can I get my ideas together? A think plan sheet. It gives the examples of this and how to follow this process. The book uses the example of POW, pick my idea, organize my notes, and write and say more. Then another acronym that can be used is the mnemonic TREE. Topic, reasons, examine, ending. Note the topic sentence, note the reasons, examine the reasons will my reader buy this, and note the ending. Another acronym is STOP for the older students. Suspend judgment, take a side, organize ideas, and plan more to write. And then the final step is a reminder to continue to plan throughout the writing process. The acronym DARE can be used. Develop your topic sentence, add supporting ideas, reject possible arguments for the other side, and then end with the conclusion. Again, that's going to be the highest level of writing. Strategies for production, students can use self-verbalizations. They want to focus attention in planning. I've got to come up with a topic sentence. Self-evaluating and error correcting. I've given 2 reasons, but I really haven't said why they're important. This isn't long enough. Evaluating how their arguments stand. Coping is self-control. I'm not going to crumple the paper and start over. I've definitely felt like that sometimes in writing. Then self-reinforcement. I know a lot about rainforests. This last sentence is good. So self-actualizing about what you've written and how well it can stand alone. Strategies for revising. Students frequently revisit revising, and when they do revise, they tend to confine their revisions to proofreading for spelling and spelling errors rather than revising to improve meaning and organization. So how do we teach them how to revise for the meaning and organization, about getting the message out? The CDO, compare, diagnose, operate, which reduces the working memory or executive demands on students. This strategy may be a good way to get students to begin to think about revision. However, because it focuses on sentence level revision, it may not influence higher text level issues related to content and organizational structure. So how to relate to the organizational structure, we can use SCAN. Scan each sentence. Does it make sense? Is it connected to my central idea? Can I add more detail and note any errors? So that connection component is very important. How do we connect it to the other ideas? The writing process classrooms often use peer revising strategies. So the author's chair is an example, and of where they sit in the chair and they tell their story and the peers can give feedback. And peer revision requires modeling by adults of the types of statements that can be helpful. Otherwise, students give vague responses such, I like it because it's a story, or make it look neater. So you want to model that correct strategy of how do we give positive, constructive feedback to students in their writing as a peer. And that is writing for this week.